Hi, everybody, and welcome to Saturday, the 22nd. Is it 22nd? I think it's the 22nd. No, it's the 23rd.
23rd. Yeah.
23rd. Who knows? Who knows what day it is? It's Saturday, the 23rd of January, in case we weren't sure. And we're here to be reflecting forward into 2021. And when we came up with that title, we weren't quite sure what that was going to look like. And boy, it's changed since. So welcome, everyone.
Hello. Excited to be here.
Hi, Shannon. Thanks for joining us. Sammy, do that again. Go on.
Go. I was just saying hello, sorry, and then I scratched my head so it looked like I had something to say, but I really didn't. I was just saying hello.
I thought you were putting your hand up as well. And we've also got joining us as well, Ian, who's my affinity buddy from VIA 20.
It's great to see you again.
Absolutely. Great to have you here. And we've already got some people saying hello in the chat. So welcome to Ben, who some of you might know. In case anybody doesn't know, he's the youngest Google trainer in the world. And he does like to mention that.
Hang on a minute. If we're mentioning that, I am the first and only female Google coach in EMEA region.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
That's something to be proud of, actually.
Yeah.
So proud.
Yeah. I had a wash this morning. What about you, Shannon? Anything to gloat about?
I am in California, so I'm pretty excited that this is the second time I've had the opportunity to jump on with you UK people. And so I feel like that's kind of awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And gradually we're going to get you more and more used to the accents.
Yeah.
It's
been a struggle, y'all. It's been a struggle. Your guys' slang is special, but I feel like eventually at the end of this, I'm going to have an honorary certificate because I'm going to be like, I'm going to be down with the lingo. We'll see, though.
100%.
So I'll try not to throw in Doric today.
It's a bit dreich up there, isn't it?
Can only handle one at a time, guys. One at a time. Baby steps.
So thanks for joining us, everyone, and taking the time out on a Saturday. And I'm going to hand straight over to Sammy because basically, if I don't, she's probably going to start making me laugh, and then we'll have nowhere to go after that.
And we probably need to do the usual disclaiming that we're not related. We share the same surname, but we're not related, just in case people think that there's something weird going on. We have no connections other than being on VIA 20.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we were related, I'm not sure I'd own up to it. But anyway, we'll go on. So we're going to have a look at sort of reflective practice today. And what does that look like for us? What should it look like? And how do we make time for it? So we're all fairly experienced in reflecting in our own practice. So we're hoping we've got some little hints and tips. And I'm really excited to hear about Ian's exciting VIA project, where it's got some really good evidence-based aspects to that. And yeah, it's going to be a really interesting discussion. So shall we make a start then? Shall we dive straight in with Ian?
Let's do it.
Okay, Ian. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your VIA project and where it came from to start with? Because I think that starts the discussion straight off about why reflective practice is important.
Sure. So I suppose that the project, well, every project in itself is a reflective practice. You think about what you would like to improve. One of the things for me, as I was a sort of new teacher about 16 years ago, was that the sort of pathways for moving up through the school from your ordinary classroom teacher to maybe a subject leader to a head of department, head of faculty, deputy head, it was fairly well mapped out. But over the years, that's been withdrawn. So when you started to lose some of the sort of middle leadership roles as schools started to move to faculties up in Scotland, it was no longer very clear about how you would make progression from a classroom teacher. And what was really missing was, that kind of advice and mentorship within schools. So my VIA project started around a conversation that I had with a former pupil of mine, Sean, who is now a maths teacher. And Sean is in that situation where he's 3-4 years into the job and he's not sure what to do next. He doesn't know how to move on into leadership. And although there are a few programs, and I'll show you how the General Teaching Council for Scotland kind of helps support teachers into preparing for leadership roles, there's that sort of in-person mentorship that's still missing. So just giving individual teachers the advice of what to do next and what to have and what to add to their CVs or their experience, so that they can make that step up when the opportunity arises. So that really kind of triggered my VIA project. And although it's a little bit away from being finished, I'm quite excited about it, and I've got a fairly clear picture of where I want it to be in about 6 months' time.
Fab. So this is future leaded. And so talk us through these standards then, because I think I'm in England, and although we have teacher standards, they're really not as drilled into us as much as they seem to be in Scotland. It's certainly for this leadership point of view, and the teacher standards are obviously going to be different in America for Shannon as well. So just give us a bit of overview of where you see reflective practice sitting in that.
Well, coming from Scotland, I've been lucky because we've always had these teaching standards, and they've kind of been extended into standards for middle leaders, which is what I am just now, and then standards for headship and sort of deputy heads. But when I went and worked abroad, and I worked in Italy for a few years and then came back and worked in London for a year, I was shocked because the same standards weren't there, and teachers weren't held up against that standard. It was really up to the individual if they wanted to push themselves forward in a particular area. So I'm actually quite excited just now about researching all the different standards around the world, and finding out a bit more about where things overlap and where we can help each other out. But in Scotland, you've got to sort of self-reflect on your professional practice as you go, and every 5 years you get a sort of a review from the GTCS to make sure that you're still meeting the standards and you're posting reflections on your own professional development. So every 5 years, you've got to kind of just load everything up onto their website and submit it and have a discussion with them and talk about the impact that this professional development's had on your practice. So it's quite good, actually. Usually, before that, we used to have to do that within our own schools, and the usefulness of it would depend entirely on who you were speaking to for your review. So this is a bit better. It's a bit more consistent, and as a result, I feel personally that I can make much more progress going forward. It's good because these standards are consistent across all of Scotland. So you go to a new school or any school and you ask for their development plan. Their development plan's matched up to these standards as well. So you can actually see where an activity that a head teacher's promoting is going to link to your professional development plan. So if you're involved in it in any way. So it's really nice. And I've had no part of developing these standards. I'm just an advocate for them, and I've actually used that with planning my future Lead Ed blog posts, which are sort of coming up in not quite as regular as I wanted to, but they are sort of based on the standards for middle leaders and head teachers, just to get people who are using the site thinking about different areas that they could reflect on.
So thinking about your blog post then, does that form part of your own reflection?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Future Lead Ed is kind of like a continuation of my sort of own teaching blog that I started about 11 years ago, I think. And I didn't used to sort of try them into the standards, but I would always think about what I'd done in class and the impact it had on me as an educator, sort of just a developing educator, just into his first or second year of teaching, but also the students. And you can see the blog post that's in the bottom there, the one about leadership reflections, talks about when I was a student teacher, and I was thinking back about how I reflected upon my classroom practice then. I was 26 years old. It was 6 months into a PGDE. I was making stuff up as I went along. I was trying to work out how to build relationships with students and deliver that kind of effective teaching and learning and assess it. And, there's a lot of stuff to take in that 1 year of teacher training. And so to make sure that I was taking it all in and reflecting on it, I had a 45-minute bus journey between the school I was in for my second placement, which was Torry, which is actually where I was originally born, and the other side of Aberdeen, where I lived. And so those 45-minute journeys each day were me just scribbling in a notebook that I'd purposed as a diary. And it started off just being reflections on everything, but very quickly turned to just what was happening in the classroom. And that was, really the sort of first time I was sitting and using sort of this downtime productively to think about how I could change my lessons. And it went into a lot of detail. So it went into the students and, you know, what their traits were. And, you know, I would try things, and I didn't know at the time, but I was using, you know, Kolb's theory of experiential learning. You know, I was sitting and writing things down and coming up with a conceptualized idea of what to do next, and then, you know, experimenting it the next time I was in class. So that was an eye opener for me, and I really felt that helped me develop. And I don't think I would have passed my year without it.
It's absolutely fascinating how you naturally became reflective, and then that helped you not just get through the year, but thrive in the year in trying new things and trying new approaches. Super. Fab. Thank you for sharing that, Ingrid.
Sorry?
Let's move from one side of the world to the other side of the world. Let's talk to the lovely Shannon. So Shannon, just give a bit about what your role is, where you are, and how that coaching role and how that fits with reflections for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So in my world, I'm actually a full-time teacher, but I'm also a part-time instructional tech coach at my site. And so I spend time, you know, one-on-one with quite a few teachers just to kind of get their practices, you know, on par. We've been virtual since March. And so, you know, it's been quite the journey. Reflection, we can all agree as educators, like reflection matters. It is so important. But the reality of it is that we don't have a lot of time to do it because everything that's going on between planning and delivery and calling parents and grading, aka marking in your side of the world, like that, you like what I just did there, guys? Lingo, I'm getting it. The time is so limited, and so a lot of the time we kind of push reflection to the side. But, you know, kind of as John Dewey said in that quote right there, like we don't learn from the experience, we learn from reflecting on those experiences. And that's something that I've tried to kind of implement into my coaching role, this idea that it's great that we have the experiences, right? But if we're not taking the time to like sit and reflect on them, then what are we doing? We're not learning anything from them. And I truly believe that once an educator, or at least I'm trying to push this forward, once an educator takes the time to sit and reflect on their own teaching practices, you know, thinking about the what and the why and the how, ultimately that allows them to remain kind of flexible in and adapt their teaching to each and every individual learner's needs. And so once again, we go back to this idea of reflection matters, right? And so in my role as a coach, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get teachers, you know, as we are going through like the busy time of life and like they're diving in and they want to jump straight into the lesson planning, I'm trying to get them to stop and take some time to develop their metacognitive skills. I'm like a big fan of metacognition, you know, thinking about our own thinking. Because if we take the time to really, like that cycle says, assess the task, you know, really think about what are the strengths and the weaknesses, plan our approach, apply it, and then reflect, and then keep coming up with new iterations over and over again, it allows us to identify the planning gaps that exist in our planning approach, which then ultimately allows us to kind of pivot. And, you know, a lot of the time, for example, we find that maybe we don't have enough differentiation within the lesson itself. And so some learners are getting left behind and others are, you know, thriving. And so that is one way that like I'm really trying to get a culture of reflection in. And then the other side of that is, you know, realizing and talking about this idea of reflection isn't just something you do in a silo. It's really something that needs to be collaborative. And I think that is, in the States, this idea of a professional learning network is huge. We meet every single week with our, you know, team levels to kind of dialogue and talk about what's working and what's not. And I think that that is so important to really take the time to realize that it is a social endeavor. You know, we learn from each other's each other's perspectives, each other's experience. And so, you know, I'm really pushing like that collaborative element of collaborative reflection. When I am coaching or working one-on-one with a teacher, kind of my first steps are, you know, starting with kind of attempting to empower them, really trying to promote self-efficacy, because I believe that like, if we believe that we can do it, right, we're going to gain these little bit of confidence, you know, here and there. And those little bits of confidence are going to grow to big confidence. And eventually we're going to, take those risks, and we're going to try to incorporate more innovative practices into our classroom design and delivery. And I think that is ultimately the win, right? We constantly need to be evolving. And I think that starts with reflection. I think that starts with us as coaches modeling what that could look like. And maybe that starts with us going into a classroom and teaching a lesson, right? A model lesson, and allowing the educator to watch that and then take some of that. And then, the next time they teach a lesson and we go in and kind of observe, and then we can talk about, what worked, what didn't work. And to be honest with you, I think it also matters on like how we approach our educators in those moments of processing. Right. I'm a firm believer in reflective questioning. So never am I going to say, this is what I saw that was good, right? Or this is where I feel like an area of growth is. I'm gonna start by asking questions of them, to get them to come to their own conclusions, because ultimately I have my own perspective, but they need to come to their own conclusions so that they can own it. And so a lot of questions like, how do you think that went? Where do you think you struggled? How can you like maybe talk about how you know that you were successful in this area or that area? Just questions to think about the kids, the audience that they're delivering to or whatever, and then also themselves.
Fab, thank you. There was so much in that, Shannon. I was frantically scribbling and
sorry.
No, it was great. It was great. And Ian was putting some stuff in the chat. So I'm gonna ask you both, and Darren, if you want to come in as well on this. So Ian, you told us about how your bus journey was your time to reflect. And then Shannon, you're talking about collaboration. And Darren, we've not got to your bit yet, but I just wonder if anyone has any insight of how that collaborative reflection or individual reflection has changed since we've gone virtual. How did it happen when we were face to face? What were the spaces we occupied when we did that collaborative or individual reflection? And did they differ now to when we're online?
I mean, if I can come in on that, just because I've not said anything yet. For me, it's not just changed since we've gone online. I think it's changed as education's changed. I was very fortunate to be part of two schools that moved from an old building to a new building. And one of the things that happens inevitably when you do that is space for teaching gets prioritized, and space for offices and staff rooms and things like that is kind of shoved in at the last minute if there happens to be any space left. And certainly when I started out as a teacher, I learned a huge amount from just sitting in the staff room and kind of getting things off my chest with colleagues, albeit in the smoking room, going back all of that way. And many of us will look back fondly on not just the veil of smoke that came out every time somebody opened the door, but the joy of having to go in and talk to somebody, even if you didn't smoke, because that was the only way you could speak to them. But I learned a huge amount from just sitting and sharing what had gone well, what hadn't, and just getting snippets of information from each other. Not only did I learn a lot, but I also learned that, it doesn't matter how long you've been teaching, everybody has good days, bad days, things that work, things that don't. And that really helped in the very early days for me, looking at that reflection process. And I think it's difficult in modern schools to replicate that, because you don't tend to have big staff rooms. You don't tend to have kind of faculty offices. So in our schools, we try and get out as much as we can during break times and lunch times, and congregate in the restaurant and things like that, just so that we can have those kind of conversations, or get out and have a walk around the playground to keep that going. But then going virtual has been more difficult. So we found using online staff rooms quite useful, and daily staff briefings, which I think was one of those things at the start of everyone thought, do we really need a daily briefing? But actually, our start at sort of 8:15, but most people are on by about 8:05, and just having a chat with everybody else in the room while they're waiting for the actual briefing and the messages and everything else to start. So that's acted as an opportunity for everybody to kind of get together. Everyone's coming in early voluntarily and kind of just bouncing ideas off of each other, or I tried this yesterday and it worked really well, or I tried that, or does anyone know how to get this to work because I'm having a nightmare with it? And that's kind of organically grown out of the need to have the daily contact from a leadership perspective. It's then just become adopted, if you like, by everyone else, and it's grown into something really useful.
Yeah. If I can add also, I think that, one thing, I think there's like a positive and a negative, right? The one negative for me is like, I feel like when you're in a space or in a room with others, you can really vibe off of their nonverbal cues and that nonverbal communication. But when you're on a screen, that's a challenge. And so one thing might be being said, but you can't. I'm a big fan of reading nonverbal cues because I think I'm a communication major, and 85% of communication is nonverbal. And so if I can't see that because I'm only seeing this portion of their body, then that really is a struggle to really get to like the deep parts of what is being said, right? The positive, on the other hand, is I feel like it's so much easier to get into classrooms. I'm kind of the department head for the English department at my school site. And so to be able to go and observe is so much easier because I literally can just click a link from the comfort of my home and I'm in a classroom, right? I don't have to like jump around. We have 22 English teachers in our department. And so trying to fit them in, with walking time and such is a thing. So I think there's positive and negatives. I mean, obviously I'd rather be in person just because communication and connections, like Darren was talking about, is so essential. But it does offer an opportunity. And then also like in department meetings or staff meetings, having the Zoom chat or the Google Meet chat, I think has been kind of an awesome asset as well, because individuals who normally maybe are a little bit more introverted in their perspective as we're trying to collaboratively reflect on something, now have a space where they can share out without feeling like they can't get a word in edgewise because they're the quiet type, right? And so there are some benefits. I think that we'd be remiss not to really talk about some strengths of virtual teaching as well along the lines. I mean, nobody really loves it, but there are some benefits I think that exist there. And so, yeah.
I would absolutely agree, Shannon. I think there's a lot of benefits with virtual teaching. With my experience when we were in the first lockdown, because we got to go back to school for a little while, we had a major sort of training curve, a sort of massive curve of sort of development needs for staff, and having staff just join in a lesson and observe it and join in, become one of the students has really helped them see the possibilities and then take that into their own classrooms. So I think I said in the chat earlier that that kind of peer observation is so valuable because everyone learns something. So when I had staff observing my sort of initial attempts at live lessons, they were giving me honest feedback about how they felt it went, and they liked some things and they hated some things, and that I learned a lot from that. But then a few weeks later, I would go into their live lessons and I would see things that they'd thought about and refined, and I stole them back for my lessons. So it was really, really brilliant. We use an awful lot of we used to be called back channels. So we use WhatsApp a lot for our faculty communication, because we do have staff briefings like Darren's school. However, sometimes having that sort of side chat where you can sort of like, just like you were saying, the non-verbal cues, you have to try and gauge the room before you ask that question sometimes. And so that side chat where you could say, is anyone going to say something? Or, does that make sense? Am I being silly? That has been really helpful as well. And so I think we've seen an awful lot more use of that, which would have been really rude in a normal staff meeting. You're sitting, everyone's on their phone while the head teacher's talking, but actually it's been really useful to have that kind of option as a side chat, just to see if you missed the point or if you need to bring something up that maybe no one else is willing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what Ben's just put in the chat as well, saying some students that wouldn't say much in the classroom are really shining virtually and coming out of the shell, which is lovely. And I think like Shannon said, we've got to celebrate some of these positives that are happening here. I always say different strokes for different folks. I am the sort of person, you meet me face to face, I'm quite shy, I'll barely say 2 words, and I'll probably run away hiding halfway through the conversation. But online, I can feel that I can open up a lot. Shannon's laughing because she's like, that's just not the perception. But It is. It's that opening up that conversation, and like you said, Ian, about those back channels as well. And there's a way, like I say, different strokes for different folks, and there's a different channel for a different style of communication. So when we're reflecting on the experiences that we're having, but we're reflecting in those side conversations as well. And it's important to recognize that as well, that everything we're experiencing is a learning experience at the moment, because we're learning so fast. Our knowledge of teaching online is exponentially growing, of how we're going to do this and how we're going to approach that. And so I can see Claire in the chat, and Claire will know that very often I'll send her a message and she'll send me a message, and we'll reflect together through that. And then we both blog as well in isolation, but we proofread and we check each other's things like that. And so we need to recognize that reflecting, when we're saying reflective practice, it's not necessarily like in Scotland, where every 5 years you've got to upload loads of documents. It's counting these things, and we call them micro joys in Joy FE. If you don't know what Joy FE is, it's a hashtag, it's a group of us. We've got a magazine, and we've now got these things called micro joys, and just celebrating those micro joys in the day. And actually, these small reflective conversations are the micro joys of the day. These, the 2 minutes I have with Claire in a morning is a micro joy of the day. The 2 minutes I have with Shannon on a morning is the micro joy of the day. But I have no concept of time differences, so it's very much not often the morning, and it's sometimes different. But these are the micro joys that are helping us get through, and they're helping us grow as educators, because we're reflecting in those conversations as well. So, Darren, if you want to talk us through, what are your best practice ideas or your best experiences of reflective practice? Are that if someone's new to reflective practice, or if they're thinking, I don't really do it properly, and I don't think there is a proper way, but I'm hoping you're going to give some insight into what you think it looks like for you.
What if I'm not?
I'll fill in the blanks for everybody.
I'm going to put my hands up here. I really I'm a bit of a rebel when it comes to trends and names and all that kind of thing. So when things like metacognition and various other kind of labels over the years have gone round, I find it really difficult to hold on to those kind of words, because they don't necessarily resonate with me. I don't know whether it's because I'm a people person rather than a process person. I don't know, but I find it really very difficult to kind of correlate what that actually means and to remember it. Like, I can sit down and I can go through, and I've done courses on metacognition and everything else. But if you said to me, explain it, I think I would probably struggle. However, I use this acronym, DEFINE, which is basically metacognition. But this is what works for me. So if I just wanted, as I said before the show, I just wanted an excuse to get basically 6 of me on screen, because who wouldn't want more of me, right? But effectively, this acronym DEFINE is the process I have developed, I think, more so during online teaching, and through VIA 20 as well, and looking at all of the stuff we've done through Innovators and the coaching program as well. In that, one of the hardest things I think to do when you're reflecting on your own practice is to disconnect, because it's yours. I think it's very, very difficult to take a step back and not be precious about it. And that's something I found incredibly difficult prior to doing VIA 20 and the Innovator program. I was very much, that's my idea. I love it. I'm passionate about it. And I'm going to kind of forge ahead with it no matter what else. Okay. So from that perspective, it just didn't sit right with me that I would disassociate myself from it. And it's something I've had to learn to do. And one of the first things we had to do as part of our VIA was basically, without knowing each other, design our logo. And huge shout out to Peter Horner, who brought it all together. Peter's in the chat at the moment. But that was really difficult because there were lots and lots of conversations going on through different time zones with different cultural aspects and everything else. And people would put ideas in, and everyone that was online at that point would be like, yeah, that's a brilliant idea. We really love that. And then we'd go to bed and we'd wake up in the morning and there'd been loads of different ideas and everything had moved on. And that was kind of hard to get your head around because you'd gone to bed thinking, yeah, we're getting somewhere. and then you wake up and it completely changed again. And your idea that might have been really popular last night suddenly isn't the popular idea anymore. And that was quite hard, because you start to kind of go, oh, hold on a minute, what about what I said? And that was a real learning curve for me. So the disconnecting side of it, I think, is very, very difficult to do. One of the things that I've done since lockdown started, and I think that reflection kind of came out of that, is I've been teaching now for 22 years, and I'm a language teacher. And I was sitting back in April thinking to myself, I've not been in the position that my students are in terms of learning a language for 22 years. I've not learned a language from scratch for 22 years. So I have no real empathy with them in terms of what it's like to learn a language these days, because, you know, my own experience of learning a language in school was very different. We had, you know, language labs, we went on exchanges, we did, you know, all sorts of different things, and the curriculum was very different and the exams were very different. So I wanted to be able to empathize with my students. And one of the things I did, I decided to just learn Italian, which I've been doing using Duolingo, and I'm on day 218. I did my 10 minutes just before the show. And, you know, I'm not fluent by any stretch of the imagination, but it came in really useful during VIA 20, because our team, Concatenate, was 3 English people, 3 Italian people. So I was able to practice, which was, you know, purely coincidence, but a great experience. And our coach also spoke Italian, so that was really good as well. But it put me back in their shoes to look at, oh my God, how annoying is it when you get it wrong and you think you've got it right, and then you have to spell something again and it tells you, no, you got it wrong. And that kind of resilience that you need, I actually suddenly found quite difficult with the Italian side of things. So that made me think very differently about how I approach learning vocabulary, how I approach teaching in terms of not just languages, but other things as well. And the opportunity to share how they're feeling about their teaching. But also, I've always been one of these people who's been very much, you know, speaking is part of language learning. You've got to speak. And in school, they'd have to do that in front of other people. And it's scary. You know, there's a lot of kind of peer pressure and everything else. I don't want to sound too daft, particularly as they get older. But certainly with virtual learning, I basically started using Flipgrid and said to them, look, record on here, send it to me. No one else is going to see it. And a little bit like Ben's comment in the chat earlier, suddenly I started to see students really coming out of their shell. But not only were they coming out of their shell and producing some very, very good speaking work with good solid accents and everything else, but I found that I was able to appreciate what they were doing a lot better, because I'm not listening to, you know, 2 people having a conversation in a classroom with 28 others doing the same thing in the background and missing out on key bits and pieces or distractions. I can listen to what they've presented to me as many times as I like. I can play it back. I can give them very individual feedback. And as a result of that, they've really enjoyed it, and their ability to speak has grown. So we've gone from do 20 seconds to do a minute. And they've really appreciated it. And they've asked if they can then do peer assessment in class. So they listen to each other's back. So we've gone from not wanting to speak to actually, can we all listen to each other and peer assess each other on a recording, because they know that it's not as high stakes. They can re-record it if they're not happy with it. They can go away and improve it before I play it out to the rest of the class. And that's where the iteration comes in. They get their feedback on it, you know, and then they go away and they improve it. And then they send it out there into the world to get a little bit more content around it. And then maybe they improve it. And I think that's something we've got to do as educators as well. You know, you empathize with your learners, try things, you know, take risks. So what if it goes wrong? Things go wrong for the best teachers in the world. It's nothing. There's so many variables that you can't take that personally. But get the feedback on it. What worked, what didn't work. And then maybe try something a little bit different. And then put it out there and get further feedback from other people. And then you're in a position to enhance it. Because certainly through, you know, my own PLN and Twitter family and the global family and the GG UK, one little thing on its own in isolation may not be a world beater, but when you start to add it together with everybody else's little building blocks, it really does enhance that whole experience. And it may not be obvious to you at the time, but those little kind of extra bits and pieces of talking to people outside of your subject area, where you suddenly think, oh, I could apply that, or talking to the students, Miss does this in her lessons, could we do some of that? I think is really vital. And as Ben said in the chat earlier on, we've been doing sort of like voluntary drop-ins, online teaching. So we've just made our links available and said to anyone on the staff, if you want to pop in and kind of watch a 10, 15, 20 minute section of our lesson and then have a chat afterwards about what we're doing, feel free. And that's been really, really positive as well.
I think I want to respond to what you've just said and what Gary said in the chat as well. And there's been a bit of discussion on the word observation. I just want to come back to your disconnect at the beginning, and I just want to bring Shannon in here because it really reminded me this disconnect of that discomfort discussion you were having on your 3Cs podcast this week, and that value of being in that feeling of discomfort before you can make changes.
Yeah. So yeah, we kind of, through all the research we conducted and just our own personal experiences, you got to be uncomfortable once in a while. And it's getting comfortable with that discomfort that allows us to grow. And I think, when Darren was talking about the disconnect, it was kind of a light bulb over my head, like, whoa, I didn't think about it in that regard, right? We hold tight. And I think we hold tight to so many things, right? Whether it be our teaching practices, the way that we conduct, our jobs, our roles in our family, whatever it may be. And when that is in question, or we're asked to maybe come up with a new iteration through reflection or try something new, that causes a lot of like not great feelings inside, right? Because we're like, but I've been doing it this way forever. And that is the moment, right? That moment of saying, okay, great, it's awesome, but couldn't we always be better? And like really framing it with the idea of take a step back, disconnect from that, live in that discomfort for just a second, so that we can then grow from it and take a step back to be able to have like a bird's eye view of actually what is going on and how could I improve. And yeah, I mean, getting comfortable with discomfort is the name of the game these days, it seems, for most educators. And thanks for the 3CCs mention, our podcast. I appreciate that. But yeah, really, I myself am really trying to get there, right? I struggled with it during the summer, and I'm starting to feel a little bit better about being okay with discomfort. But, it's never a positive feeling, but definitely the what comes out of it is exceptional, I think.
Yeah, I think he's just summed it up beautifully there. Fabulous. And then I just wanted to pick up about the discussion that's been happening on this word observation. And I think a few of us have mentioned how being virtual has made it easier to drop into lessons. I know Stephanie said that it's a bit harder because she has to get the link and she could have just knocked on the door. And I think it depends on your environment, but it reminds me of a Joy FE conversation we've been having recently, where we've been talking about what do we call it? What do we call it? The thing where we come see you teach, what do we call it? Because if I say observation, it's going to make you go, oh, you're coming to judge me. So if I say drop in, well, you're not staying long enough. Why aren't you staying? Am I not good enough? Why are you just dropping in? Why can't you stay longer? I'm an amazing teacher. And there's no right way with the language. And Shannon, you're much better at language than I am. But it struck me that if we're there to help and support, I think we need to build a culture of an open door policy to start with. And it's that culture of open door, come see me anytime, because I'm never going to dress it up. I'm never going to make anything fancy. I'm just going to be me. And then once you accept that, and like we say, probably disconnect from your practice in being this perfect thing that you build up in your mind on that one day of the year when you need to be perfect, once you disconnect from that view that you hold of yourself as a teacher, and you think, do you know what, they're just going to have to take me and find me. And I'm going to share now what's happened to me this week. So I teach GCSE maths, which is high school maths. Hi, Mel, how do you build that culture? I'm going to tell you. I teach high school GCSE maths. and I teach it online. I teach adults. In America, it's similar to community college education. It's called further education in the UK. And I have my Google Classroom, and I have everything on there. And I said to someone, oh yeah, just drop in on my Google Classroom anytime. Well, they did. And then they brought the head of teaching and learning, the director of teaching and learning, everybody in that department was added as a teacher to my classroom. And I got really upset about it. I got really upset because the culture's not there. Because the culture is, there's a hierarchy, and these people are above me in the hierarchy, and all of a sudden they're coming in and they're judging me. And they were, but in a helpful way. But because I wasn't informed of that process and involved in that process, it came as a massive shock. And so what I took from that is, when you're building this culture of this open door policy, is be open about the process as well. What is it that you're coming to see? What is it you're going to look for? And what's going to happen? And like Geg UK magically put in the chat, trust is vital in that. And that's through that open discussion and that open conversation. And I've done a lot of work recently on using Flipgrid for teachers to self-select 10 minutes of their teaching. So they record their Google Meet, and then they take 10 minutes of that and they upload it to Flipgrid. And then I can timestamp in that when we're reflecting together in a coaching conversation. So when we're talking about building relationships, and there was an argument someone put to me of, well, they're just going to pick the best 10 minutes. And what's wrong with that? And what's wrong with that? If we're reflecting together, then, you know, we're learning, and we're learning from the experience. And if you're picking the best 10 minutes, then you know it's the best 10 minutes. So you know how to replicate those 10 minutes. The challenge is to do that 10 minutes 10 times over. So I've talked for a long time there. So I just wanted to come back to something that we talked about earlier on, which was about the co-planning and the team teaching aspect. So when I was learning to teach, we did a thing called team teaching. I think, Shannon, you said, I'll come teach a session, you can watch me, and then I'll come watch you teach. And Darren, you'll probably remember team teaching was the absolute be all and end all when we were learning to be teachers, and Ian, probably the same as well. And then Claire put in the chat as well about planning online and the ability to share. So I just wanted your thoughts, really, and anyone can go first, but what are your thoughts on that, starting the reflection of the planning point of view and that co-teaching point of view? What are your thoughts about that as a process?
Who are you asking?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't heard from Ian in a while. I'd love to hear your perspective, sir.
Thanks. So, I mean, I'm lucky. So at present, I have a sort of new probationer teacher who's part of our faculty. And so there's a lot of co-planning sessions that go on. Some of it in person when we were back in school, and some of it over WhatsApp, and some of it over Google Meet. And that seems to be, that's a really powerful thing, actually, is that it doesn't really matter what platform we use. It's just that we have that conversation. And when Sammy was talking about how the sort of hierarchy kind of imposed on the classroom drop-ins, I kind of that resonated with me, because early on in my teaching career, that was how it happened. You know, your line manager, your SLT, or your head teacher would just turn up to your lesson, but like one of those sort of surprise inspections, and they'd sit down at the back with a clipboard, and at the end you would await the feedback, not knowing what they were looking at in your lesson, or why they were there in the first place. They might have just been having a quiet coffee in the back of your room. But the conversation, the communication has to be there at the start, and I think that's really important for your sort of co-creation of curriculum. You have to have a conversation about what the purpose is of having that conversation. Does that make sense? So you have to sort of say, right, well, we're going to sit down, we're going to look at this today, we're going to look at this topic or this one lesson, and what are we going to get out of it? And once that sort of purpose is agreed, then I think you can get a lot more valuable output from that session. It doesn't matter if it's 20 minutes, if it's over a break time, or if it's over a longer period of time.
Yeah, interesting, and that's just popped into my head as well. So many years ago, a colleague and I co-planned a whole year's worth of teaching for a series of teachers in our department, and we just put loads of resources in, and we were like, "That's it, they're done, they're off, they can go." And it bombed, and we were incredibly surprised that it bombed because we'd given them our best resources. Like, why? We're excellent teachers, how dare they? But what we've not done is we've not reflected on the impact of those resources for their learners. So us telling them that it's a good resource for our learners really didn't help the fact. And so when we iterated on it the following year, it ended up being, these are the resources, let's meet, let's discuss together. So these are what we've said are the good resources. You tell us how that's going to look like in your classroom. What did you learn from that experience? And how can we make it better? Because there's still nothing wrong. Obviously, my resources are excellent. There's nothing wrong with my resources. It's how do we adapt them for your learners? And that's through that reflective discussion. But Darren, as well, it's this team teaching element. I'm guessing when you learned to be a teacher like I did, it was the bee's knees.
Yeah. And, you know, I loved it because you weren't always in a situation where, you know, teaching can be a lonely profession, right? Because you can be in your classroom 5 hours a day, actually not see another adult. So the opportunity to team teach with somebody else and just get their perspective on how they might deliver something, or the ability to bounce off each other, I think is fantastic and is real life, let's face it. And it drives me mad. And one of my pet hates really is this whole kind of, and we've had it for years in the UK, where if somebody is observing your lesson, whether that's, you know, a senior leader, whether it's an Ofsted inspector, you should almost ignore them and they should ignore you. They come in, they sit and they observe and they make notes and then they leave. And I actually had a colleague, a very good friend of mine, who involved an Ofsted inspector in his lesson because he was teaching a French lesson and they were describing people and what they look like. So he got the kids to describe the Ofsted inspector. And he got absolutely lambasted for it by the inspector for involving them in the lesson, which I just think is so bizarre because, you know, with 32 kids in the room, how can you pretend somebody's not in there? Of course they're in there. And let's just embrace it and get on with it. But that ability to bounce off each other, I think, is fantastic. And then just talk about it afterwards, because you will, you know, it's not necessarily a formal meeting, but just that 30-second, blimey, that went wrong, didn't it? Or, you know, I never expected that to go to as well as it did. But why did it? What was it today? And it might be the time of the day, the lesson they had before. It could be absolutely anything. But the chance to bounce off of somebody else just isn't there on a day-to-day basis quite often. And lots more departments are starting now to, as you say, kind of cross-plan, but you've still got to leave that element of creativity in there and that flexibility for people to be themselves as well. Otherwise, it just becomes stale and nobody wants that.
No, absolutely. Sorry,
yeah.
Ian.
No, I was just listening to what Darren was saying, and I was having flashbacks to similar situations. But when I first started sort of teaching after my NQT year, I was lucky there was 3 NQTs that got the job in the same school in the same department. And so we really just vibed off each other all the time. So it was an open plan floor. We could hear each other's lessons going on. We could even we could take little snippets of like what they were teaching in that particular lesson and actually teach it within the next sort of 30 seconds. And I do remember an inspection about 10 years ago where we were teaching the same class. We're both being inspected at the same time. 2 different inspectors, same class or year group, and we delivered essentially the same lesson. But we were listening to what each other was saying in the lesson and making sure that, you know, because at the end of the day, we're talking about sort of reflecting, and we're reflecting for a purpose, and it's not just for us, it's to improve the learning of the students, and the students are always the reason we do this. And so when Darren was saying about the inspector being annoyed at being the focus or part of the focus of the lesson, I think the inspector missed the point, because the point is to get the students engaged and involved and apply it to their life. And at that moment, the inspector was in the classroom and that was their life. But we were delivering the same lesson. We didn't involve the inspectors. That would have been good. But at the end of it, one of us got slammed and one of us got praised for exactly the same lesson. And that but knowing that and having that conversation between ourselves made it much better, because we came to the conclusion that, you know, one inspector was looking for one thing and another inspector was looking for another thing. And so just having that kind of support network, that someone you could trust inside the school, was super important, and it made a big difference to the students in the classroom as well.
And that's the thing, it's so subjective.
It is. It is, and that's what I was saying about building that open culture, is what's the process and what's the purpose of the process. And if everyone is open and aware of what that is, then that open door culture, I maybe have a utopian view, but I do think it is achievable if everyone's involved in the process.
But you've also, just to add to that, I mean, you know, you've got to, if you want that open culture to grow, you've got to celebrate what's going well. But equally, celebrate the things that didn't go so well, but at least the person tried it. You know, celebrate the failures just as much as you celebrate the successes, because that's how you get the successes. This teacher took a risk and tried this. Okay, on that day it didn't work, but they're now going to tweak it a little bit or try doing it a little bit differently, and they're going to try it again, and we'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely right, Darren. Brilliant. So we're coming to the end. So I just wanted, and get your thinking caps on. I'm coming to you first, Shannon. I'm thinking, now we're in this online world and we're going to be in it for some time. Unfortunately, let's not pretend that we're not. How are we going to have these conversations? What are the structure of those conversations looking like? And are there any tools or any hints or tips we could share today of how we could have these reflective conversations? So I'm putting you on the spot, Shannon. I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, no problem. I honestly think the first step is going to be building relationships, making connections in ways that are not about like school, right? So one thing I've been trying for teachers that I maybe are not in my department, but that I know are struggling or have mentioned things here and there, is just sending them a quick email once in a while, checking in, like, hey, how you doing? You know, or if they say something in a staff meeting, or, you know, we're in a breakout room, really being like mindful of that, and then checking up, following up, and being like, hey, you mentioned you got a new puppy, like, how's it going? Things like that, just to really build those relationships first. And then from there, you know, you can then start to really dive into the academic side. I do the same thing with my students, right? You can't expect them to perform academically if they don't believe that you care about them as a person who is someone outside of just a seat in a chair, a butt in a chair, right? Like you got to get to know them on a deeper level. And so that would be like my first suggestion. And then just reiterating and modeling that idea that Darren was mentioning, the fail forward. You know, a lot of educators, because I have the technological know-how to navigate like the virtual world, a lot of educators often mention they get like intimidated by that, right? But it's showing them that, okay, yeah, just because I can like, you know, navigate the technology, I fail every single day, and like demonstrating that and modeling that and really speaking about that and like giving them hardcore examples of that. So it's not just like, oh, okay, they say that. And then I guess my last tip would be really reiterate over and over that every single teacher and educator in their own classroom is an artist. And although you have, you know, curriculum you have to get through and there's standards and skills you need to meet, that like artistry shouldn't go away in the classroom. And so be you, don't try to be anybody else, but make sure that, you know, you're constantly reflecting and going back to, am I meeting the goal, right? So connections, model failure and failing forward. And then I would say just reiterating that artistry matters in the classroom.
I love that everyone's an artist. I think that's great. I can hear what Darren would say then. What kind of artist? Anyway, let's go to you. Let's go to you, Ian. Your top tips for building those connections then, or the tools that you would use to communicate, or anything that you could share with anyone today.
So I've got a couple of things that I jotted down. So when I was an early teacher, and well, sort of beginning teacher, sort of late 2000s, we didn't really have the ability to send out sort of Google Forms or Survey Monkeys or things to our students. But I was really interested in the student voice, because there's nothing that can be improved really unless you check with the kids. So I used something called a rant sheet. So basically it was the scrap paper near the printer which I quickly handed out at the end of a topic or a test or a particular series of lessons. And I said, right, you've got 3 things you got to write down a rant. So I kept it open, because if you keep it open, you find out things that you weren't expecting. So I say, if you want to slag off the teacher, I'm not going to care. It's all anonymous. If you want to slag off me, if you want to slag off the way that I talk, if the fact that you can't understand me, or I talk too much, or my slides are wrong, or you can't make out what's on them, if you want to slag off the test, if you want to rant about the length of time that you got to prepare, or the homework. So giving them this open kind of field for ranting really produced some positive results. And one really sticks with me still to this day. Because we're in that open plan environment, what I didn't realise was that students at the very back of the class on one of the sides were actually closer to the next door teacher than to me. So what happened was we had sort of little soundproof sort of barriers between each room. And if they got moved or kicked accidentally, then you would hear the teacher next door, and that's what happened. So the student had spent 4 or 5 weeks sitting, listening to someone else's lesson. They could see my mouth moving, but they couldn't understand what was saying because the teacher next door was overlapping. And instead of saying it, they were those quiet students, like you were saying, Sammy, earlier on, that wouldn't speak up in class. And so giving them that rant sheet, they went for it. And within 10 minutes of me seeing that, we made sure that we rebuilt that wall in the corner. We added some extra soundproofing. We made sure that the students could hear us. It also helped me as a practitioner better understand my environment. So I moved more around the room. So not just standing at the front, the chalk and talk. I would stand at the back of the room near the student, talking forward. Use the remote mouse so that you could advance the slides and things. And that really helped my teaching practice. So I keep on bringing that up because it was such a powerful reflection from that student that really improved me as an educator, but also improved their education.
Wonderful. It's brilliant. I love that. I love that so much. Darren, come to you then. Your top tips for creating these spaces now to have these conversations.
Well, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, my sort of Twitter PLN and everything else has been fantastic, and this last year has grown exponentially, and it's so good to be able to see everybody's ideas and resources coming forward. And I think that's the first thing. Do share. As teachers, we often, and we've talked about it many times before, we often suffer from imposter syndrome. We don't think anything that we're doing is particularly special, but actually it could be an absolute game changer for somebody else. And it might only be one aspect of what you share, but that one aspect can make a huge difference. And I think if you can take one good thing out of everything and put it all together, like 101% is all you need, right? The other thing I would say, and we've started doing it at our schools, is because with Google Chat now, you've got the option of rooms, which people can join and leave at any time they like. But you can also share files super easily and find them really easily. It's much more instantaneous. It's much more informal than sending emails. You can assign tasks to each other within it that then goes into their own task. And we've already found people starting to share a lot more through those chats because it's, I found this, I thought it might be useful. Or if this is any good to anyone, it's no good to me, but it might be useful in this subject or that subject. So it's virtually kind of like just creating almost like a waterfall effect of people are seeing things and starting to have in their mind what's useful for other people, not just themselves. And I think that's a really, really positive thing, because if we can all work together, we don't all need to be, reinventing the wheel and all coming up with, 22 people in the department, as Shannon says, don't need 22 different lessons. What about one lesson with 22 takes on it? And that's the way I think we need to be working as professionals. We've got enough people trying to kind of like do us down and give us a hard time. Let's work together on it and make our lives easier.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. I'm just going to take Gary's question then about encourage communication between staff. I think Darren's use of chat is really great. Something else that we use that's similar is Google Currents. So where you can tag people into something that you're sharing and it's within your domain. So we find that really useful. We also have a staff classroom where we force invite everyone onto the staff classroom. They have to unenroll from the staff classroom. But then on there, I put like a cool Slides Mania template, or I put a cool something that I found on Twitter or something like that. And the feedback from that has been massive. I'm in a college group where we've got about 1,500 staff, 20,000 learners over about 15 sites. So we're huge. So we've had this distant connection for a long time now. And I still talk to myself, Gary, and I think it's just one of those things that you do talk to yourself all the time. Flipgrid is really good, but also Wakelet's now come into its own for everybody because you can mix it up. So perhaps consider, and we're just starting this out, so I don't know how successful it's going to be, but we've got a Wakelet board where if you want to blog about your lesson or jot down a reflection about your lesson or ask someone a question about why do you think this went wrong in my lesson, you can type it and write it into the Wakelet. Or if you want to do a video into the Wakelet and go, I did this in my lesson and it was absolutely amazing and I think everybody should know about it, you're buzzing from it, but also it's a space where you can reach out and you can comment and you can tag with each other as well. So Wakelet's really come into its own as well, Gary, and as ever, just change it up, keep iterating and keep trying. If you are talking to yourself, it won't be for long. Someone will respond at some point, and just keep doing a great work. Yeah, and a Jamboard as well. Pose a question, give people think time. Using a GIF as a background in a Jamboard is a great way to start that conversation as well and get everyone to put their sticky notes on. So I think we're just coming to the end now, but I've made frantic notes as we've gone through all of this. That's how I've kept track of it. But the key words then that are still left on my notes are: reflection matters, connections matter, model those behaviours and think about your impact. And I think that sort of sums up the discussion really lovely. So I'd like to thank Ian. He's Family Simpson on Twitter. He's got the Future Lead Ed project, which is some excellent, insightful blogs on there. I'd like to thank Shannon from joining us from all the way in California. Shannon is also part of the 3 Caffeinated Coaches, who has an excellent podcast that's really worth listening to think about discomfort this week and being comfortable with that feeling of discomfort. And then Darren, Ranga the Trainer on Twitter, and also he's got an epic YouTube channel. So if you do want to know anything about a tool or anything like that and a quick hack or a quick shortcut, Darren is definitely the man to know. And then my name's Sammy and I'm What the Trig Math, and I blog about my maths classroom and the pedagogy of why we do what we do online. But thank you very much for joining us, guys.
And just to give a shout out, join us again on the 8th of February at 7 p.m. for Launching to Web Puzzle with myself and Rachel Coatup, Techmiss C on Twitter, and the bit.ly there for sign up, Launch into Ed Puzzle. Come and join us for a great live workshop as well. And thanks for joining us, everyone.